Welcome back to the R53 channel. We've got a short little video for you today. We're going to be putting the oil filter housing back onto the engine block that we're working on. Not this one, but another one we have over here. The oil filter housing is a kind of a trouble spot on the W11 engines, as you may know. It's probably, I would say, next to power steering systems that we covered in the last video, the most egregious leak point on the W11. So we've got the mounting of the oil filter housing to, I'm going to spill oil all over the place here. I got oil filter housing to the block, to the crankcase, and then we also have the area on here where the oil filter cooling, or the heat exchanger, the water to oil heat exchanger connects to on two different O-rings here. So there's a lot of places for things to leak out, and that's just the oil side, not even talking about the oil cooler itself leaking coolant on its hoses. So we'll get right to it. We'll get the camera on the engine and start the process of reinstalling this oil filter housing. Taking a quick tour on the back side of the engine, which we don't often get a chance to see. I just wanted to point out the oil filter housing mount is right there, if it wasn't obvious from the 3 ports that we have on here. We've got our M8 bolts that we're going to be tightening down and mounting that oil cooler with, or oil filter housing with. If you've ever changed out your timing chain tensioner, the bolt for that, the very tight bolt for that, is right here. We're not going to do it on this engine. It's a 30,000 mile example, so I'm just going to leave that one in there. It's not terribly hard to get at when the engine's in the car. It's not fun, but it's not too bad. So I'm going to leave that original tensioner in there. Some other interesting things here. We have a ladder style engine block. This W11 engine built by Tritec in Brazil has this ladder section here, and then it's got the upper block here. Most people don't realize there's actually engine serial numbers, not that they're meaningful or anything, but there are some engine serial numbers located down here on the seams between the ladder section and the upper, and they both have it, the upper engine block. So if you ever get a chance to get your engine out, take a look down here. I'm not gonna even try to get it on camera because they're just done with a digital, kind of like a pinpoint marking system, but they are numbered on the upper and lower halves there, so it's kind of neat. All right. The other aspects of this, we've got freeze plugs here on the engine. Obviously those never come out. I was going to paint this engine back to its normal black color, but I decided to leave it the original patina, if you will. We've got some markings down here that I like to preserve, and although it's not terribly difficult to paint these engines when you got the transmission off and the starter off, it's a matter of just taping things up. I decided to just leave this engine as it is. It does have a little bit of rust patina on it, but I'm going to leave that there to just keep it as original as possible. As you know, this is the restoration, preservation, and admiration channel for the R53. So there are times where I will leave things that could be improved visually, but I'll leave them. And that's going to be the case here in this particular refurbishment. Moving our attention down to the parts and tools du jour, we've got the oil filter housing itself. It's already got a new filter inside. It's already ready to go and be bolted on. Just wanted to point out that the torque specs for these parts, for starters, the actual torque specs for all of these parts on the oil filter housing are actually kind of elusive, and looking them up on the internet can be quite challenging trying to figure out what is what. And there are some different numbers also for the W11 engine versus the W10 engine, the standard non-S model W10. So we need to keep that in mind as well. So on the oil filter cap itself, it's set for 25 Newton meters, which is about 18 and change, 18.4, I believe, foot-pounds. But that also happens to be the same value that we're going to be using for the through bolts to actually mount this to the engine, also 25 Newton meters. So that's interesting. I believe the torque spec on the W10 is 30 Newton meters for those attachment bolts that go on the engine. So that's kind of interesting that the torque is higher on the W10, but nonetheless, we have those specs from the TIS manual and the TIS books, so we want to use those. Definitely we're dealing with aluminum here on this side, so when it comes to the cooler that mounts to here with the 2 O-rings, those are the ones that are really difficult to find the numbers for, and I haven't been able to actually locate an official source for them yet, but the consensus is 10 Newton meters, which comes out to about 88 inch-pounds on that one. So we're going to be using a T30 Torx for those guys to get these bolts and mount that to the oil cooler itself. So we'll use a 10 for that and 25 for the larger M8 bolts on the block. As far as the actual gaskets that I'm using here, these say ECS tuning. I go to ECS for just about everything, but I was kind of disappointed in that I purchased the factory OEM, you know, parts from supposedly from BMW, but when I received them, they come in these generic bags. And I did contact ECS on this. I've been buying from them for 12, 13 years at least. And I was kind of upset that, you know, you go ahead and pay $12 for the profile gasket here, and it comes in a bag with the ECS sticker tuning, ECS tuning sticker on it. Turns out, it sounds like these are so common of a gasket that's repaired so often on these oil filter housings that they buy them in bulk and then repackage them. So you're not going to get the blue and white BMW packaging, at least from ECS on those. But they did give me confidence that these were in fact the actual OEM gaskets. As a quick aside, since we have another motor here to look at, this one happens to be an 86,000 mile example out of the actual John Cooper Works Checkmate. You can see that this particular oil cooler has been leaking for a long time, and when I purchased this car off the previous owners, they didn't really tell me anything about the oil leaks, but when I got it home, this thing was just leaking everywhere. And now that I've got it out of the car, I've been able to pinpoint that the bulk of the leaks were indeed coming from this oil filter housing. And even when I drained the oil out of this engine when it was still on the rack and had it mounted in the car, it was leaking even after draining the oil. Once I got the engine out and put it on this cart, it's still been leaking. So it's essentially been a constant flow of oil coming out of this engine. Even when there's really no oil left to speak of in the crankcase, it's still coming out of the oil filter housing. Also wanted to point out, if you didn't notice this bright green connector here, that goes to our oil pressure switch, and that gets bolted and screwed into the oil filter housing, and that's very important. This oil pressure switch is that red light that you see in your dash. If it ever comes on, turn your engine off immediately in order to save the engine. If you don't have any oil pressure, engine's dead. Plain and simple. You lose water, you lose oil, you lose your engine. So this particular sensor is a switch. I'm not sure what the trigger point is on it pressure-wise, but I can tell you that at idle, I believe it's supposed to be about 3.6 psi internally into the engine. If you don't have that pressure, the engine cannot run or should not run. When it's actually up running 3,000 RPM, it could be anywhere between 25 and about 80 psi in this motor, coming from that oil pressure geared pump in the front crankcase there. So very important connector, very important piece of wiring, very important sensor to make sure it is working properly. If you see that oil light come on, there may be something wrong with this, but more importantly, don't take any chance running the engine if you see an oil light. Talking about the restoration aspect of these engines, since we're at the back here, this wiring harness tends to get frayed quite a bit because it is underneath this pin. You see the little white fabric line here that tells the technicians assembling the engine that's where the harness lines up with on that clip. So that's what that fabric tape is. I've found it actually a really good replacement for the factory tape on this, and I wanted to share that with you. To the left of this connector is the original fabric tape that's on the wiring harness. To the right of this connector is this tape here. It's called the X-Fasten wire harness tape. See if I can get it right there. It's really easy stuff to work with, stays on nice and tight, and really matches the original wire loom fabric nicely. All right, with our gaskets ready to go, we have our profile gasket here. It can only go on one way, so we just got to find the right magic spot for that. And that should be it here. It's got little ridges on there to keep it in place. I'm gonna check our one-way valve here to make sure that's springy and that there's nothing in it. I usually recommend taking a little bit of oil, and of course we've got copious amounts of oil because these things will continue to leak oil all day long. So we got that on there. Also, we want the face of the interface on the crankcase to be clean as possible. If you have to Scotch-Brite it, do so. Just make sure all the fuzz and everything is captured and not inside the engine. Okay, let's get this oil filter housing mounted. Obviously, we have to arrange our 3 bolts here accordingly. This is the long bolt over here, and the 2 short ones are on the left side as we're looking at the back of this block. So this is going to go like that. I recommend getting your M8 bolt, the long one, on an extension just to get ready to go to line that up. Get it through, and you can actually watch it. Obviously, this is a lot easier when we have this engine on a stand, unlike most people are going to be working on this oil filter housing while it's still in the car. That's no fun. But I figured these types of videos are helpful when you do have the engine out to show where things really go and help you decide how to approach and attack. Gloves make it a little bit difficult here with these. I like to get some Koken extensions that have nice grips on them. These are just cheesy, I don't know where I even got these, but no name extensions. All right, those are all hand torqued. Just cross-checking our values here, looking like 15 plus 3, that's 18 foot-pounds, which corresponds to that roughly 25 Newton meters for these particular bolts. I'm not going to do them all at once here. We're going to go kind of around the world and just do a little bit at a time, just to keep the tension fairly even as we go around. I'm just supporting the wrench here. I don't want to interfere with the torque application. There it is. Go back to this one. There it is. And there it is. Also, interestingly, you probably can't see it in this particular shot, but it does say 25 Newton meters inside that cap there with the corresponding 18 foot-pounds. And that's when you go ahead and tighten this down with, I think, a 36 millimeter wrench to get the cap down. This one I've been doing by hand for years on these. I just kind of stop when it bottoms out and maybe just a tiny bit more after it bottoms out. So there it is. We've got our oil filter housing mounted to the engine block, and now we can move on to the heat exchanger portion of the install. All right, get a little bit of oil here. Like I said, we always got some available. Continual drip. I'm gonna get this bottom one, or sorry, get the top one in there first, so we want to get some more oil off the bottom side. This can be a very problematic area on these cars. I've had a good friend of mine change this out 3 times before he got a good seal on his, and I'm not sure if it was just a matter of improper torquing or bad O-rings from a third-party supplier. He seems to think that it was just a warped heat exchanger, so I can see that definitely being a problem. If these get too hot, I suppose this aluminum plate could warp a little bit and you're not going to get a good seal on it, so that's very possible as well. Mine looks to be fairly flat. I didn't put a blade across it or anything, but it was not leaking before I took it apart, so I'm hoping that it's still not leaking. All right, we've got our oval O-rings in there, and if there's a alignment stud right here, you can see which goes through this hole, and there's another one over on this side as well, and then we'll get our Torx bolts in there as we get it lined up. There we go. And once again, I've got my handy dandy extension on here, and it'll make it a little bit easier to get these bolts spun in. Now this one's definitely no fun when it's in the car, and definitely no fun with gloves on once again. I do use power tools sometimes, but I tend to really enjoy working on my cars, and it just seems, I don't know, like a disconnect using a power ratchet to install stuff. I like hand turning everything I can and feeling the bolts go in and making sure I'm not over torquing them or stripping them. So I like to play it safe with hand fitting versus using power tools. Sometimes it gets to be just a pain in the butt and you have to pull out the electric wrench, like for suspension components and things like that. It doesn't make sense. Okay, now for the fun part. Well, by fun I mean scary / critical. And just want to verify my torque on these. This is going into aluminum, so nobody wants to buy a new oil filter housing for stripping out a bolt here or using helicoil or anything crazy. So just want to confirm here. Again, we're shooting for 10 Newton meters on this one, which I believe comes out to 88 inch-pounds. So Looks like we're right at 88 on this wrench, and we'll give these a quick check here around the world and not do any one torque at once. That one actually already clicked. I'll go back up to it. It should click. Yep. There we go. Go back to this one. Oh, there's that one. And there's that one. So I'll just go give them a click around, make sure they're all good. We've only got 4 bolts here. Basically, any of these bolts that we just torqued today are lifeblood critical to your car. So we want to make sure that the oil filter housing, its bolts, its pressure switch, all the connections here in this particular area are properly torqued and ready to go with the proper seals in there. Like I said, this one was not leaking when I took it apart. However, being that the seals are 20 years old in this motor, it's always a good idea to change them out with fresh rubber on these guys, just because you don't want to have to do it later. It's going to start leaking eventually, but let's start the clock over again by putting some new rubber in there and giving us some time on the road without having to worry about that. Like I said, on the timing chain tensioner, however, I'm going to leave that in place. That's a hydraulic cylinder that pushes against your timing chain guides on this particular side of the engine. It'll start rattling and making a pretty obvious sound. It won't really hurt anything initially, so we'll go ahead and change this out when the time comes. But for now, I'm going to leave that in place. Now that we've got our oil filter housing attached, we can go ahead and connect up the electrical connector for the oil pressure switch. Now these little guys are obviously very important, and they come with a security switch on here, which often gets broken because people don't know how to manipulate them. So we're going to show you how that goes here. It's not that complicated once you've had a chance to play with it, but usually they're covered in oil and grease and you really can't see what's going on. So this one's all cleaned up and ready to go. I'm going to push it through here so you can see what it looks like latched first. That's what you'll encounter when it's on, with this button pushed in from, I guess, right to left when you're looking at the oil switch from the back. So in order to unlatch these, you have to get a tool. I use this pick tool, this screwdriver that I've had for years. I use for everything like this. And you have to basically get your driver tip in right about there, and there's a little foot that goes down. Kind of hard to see, but it will push down and allow that to go across. So it's just a cross bolt type of thing, and once it's across, it'll be able to go on. So that's unlatched, and even latching it's difficult. Give you a little assist there, and that's latched. Now that you've seen how the connector works, let's go ahead and try to get it off of the oil pressure switch while it's still in situ. So I'm going to take my tool here and look for that little foot and try to drag that foot back towards the wire side of the connector. I've got it right there. I can feel the springiness. And then once I've got that, I can get my fingernail in there and pull the cross bolt latch to the left here, and now that's released. But the sensor's still not going to come off because there's a primary latch here that you have to squeeze on the bottom side, and then once that's pressed, you can remove the sensor. So here's the secondary latch here you have to depress in order to get it to actually come off. So going back on, you can listen for the initial one. There it goes, and then we have the cross safety, and now it's locked on. One last bit of commentary on the oil pressure switch here. If you have any oil pressure issues and you ever wanted to test your oil pressure, the best place to do it and the factory recommended place to do it is right here at this point. So you would unscrew this thread. I think it's 3/8 NPT, not positive on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. You would unbolt the sensor completely and install a BMW tool, basically an adapter that would screw into the oil filter housing here, to which then you could attach a oil pressure gauge, run the engine, and see where your rough oil pressure is, and get a determination whether you might have an oil pump issue or not. At that point, it's probably almost just as easy to take off the oil filter or the oil pump on the timing cover. But if you did want to check the oil pressure, or maybe you wanted to just tap into the oil pressure and have an oil pressure gauge on your dash, which is always nice to have, you could use this point right here to really get a solid measurement of your engine's oil pressure. All right, that concludes today's Rover 53 video on the oil filter housing of the Mini Cooper R50, 52, and 53 W10 and W11 engines. Hope you enjoyed that one. We'll continue on with this particular GP1 motor and working to get it back into the Checkmate, or I should say into the Checkmate for the first time, and continue working on the subframe that you saw earlier in the first video. Hopefully getting all the suspension components mounted and ready to go for that. So we hope you join us, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks much.